Imagine Billy Gibbons, the bearded blues rock legend whose riffs have thundered through arenas for half a century, stepping up to the mic at 75 and declaring he's finally going to tell the untold story of ZZ Top. Warts and all. It's time, he says, voice gravelly but steady, to lift the velvet curtain on the mechanics of our magic. If you thought you knew every legendary riff, every well-waxed mustache moment, brace yourself. The man in the shades is about to reveal rivalries, regrets, and revelations that even the most die-hard fans never heard before. Let's rewind to the dusty Texas highways of the late 60s. Billy, born in Houston in 1949, had a preacher's son's upbringing with Sunday hymns in his ears, but found his soul ignited by bluesmen like Elmore James and Freddie King. He formed his first band at 17, drawing townsfolk to sweaty honky-tonks with his searing slide guitar and magnetic stage presence. By the time he crossed paths with bassist Dusty Hill and drummer Frank Beard in 1969, they were three hungry souls chasing a singular dream: to marry Texan swagger with Delta reverence. In those early days, the trio worked bar after bar, sleeping on studio floors, splitting gas money, and scraping together paychecks to lay down demos. But conflicts arose almost immediately. Dusty's laid-back, bohemian vibe clashed with Billy's perfectionist streak. Frank's irreverent humor puzzled Billy's more reverent approach to the blues form. And behind closed doors, tensions soared. Arguments over song arrangements, snide remarks about stage attire, even midnight disputes over car keys when gigs ended past dawn. Yet, they had chemistry, like volatile chemicals that burst into golden recordings the moment they stepped on stage. Fast forward to 1973, when ZZ Top dropped Tres Hombres, and the world finally heard that Texas stomp blended with pure blues fire. Fans flocked to tracks like La Grange and Jesus Just Left Chicago, drawn by Billy's mastering of tone and Dusty's burly thump. But few knew that the recording sessions nearly derailed over mounting frustrations. Billy insisted on chasing a raw, live sound, while producer Bill Ham pushed for tighter radio-ready edits. Hours became days as Billy and Dusty locked horns, Billy wanting extended jams, Dusty fearing the edits would lose the groove. Frank tried to keep peace by playing endless drum fills, but the backroom debates grew so deafening the engineers threatened to walk out. That friction, Billy now confesses, was no backstory footnote. It was the crucible that forged their identity. Without those arguments, he says, they wouldn't have found the balance between loose soul and razor-edge precision. We argued over every note, Billy laughs, thumb sliding over his vintage Gibson. But that's how we discovered our secret sauce. He credits those fights with birthing both the gritty 70s albums and the slick 80s reinvention that saw ZZ Top conquer MTV with Sharp-Dressed Man and Legs. Yet, Billy admits, not every transition was embraced in harmony. By the time Eliminator rolled out in 1983, the band's sound, layered with synths, sequencers, and drum machines, amazed fans and critics alike. But Dusty, a purist at heart, initially recoiled at the electronic sheen invading their blues roots. "I thought we were selling out," Dusty told a radio interviewer in '84. Frank, ever the mediator, said the new approach felt like playing a fresh deck of cards. Meanwhile, Billy saw it as evolution, an embrace of technology to amplify their swagger. The tension simmered, only kept in check by packed stadium tours and skyrocketing record sales. Contrast framing. On stage, the three bearded silhouettes looked inseparable, cruising in identical Cadillacs and matching tonal gear. Offstage, Billy confesses now, they were like brothers with knives hidden in their back pockets, ready to slit each other's throats over sonic decisions. That hidden combustion, he says, fueled the creative engine that kept ZZ Top relevant across decades. Today, at 75, Billy Gibbons stands ready to pull these stories into the light. The bus stop betrayals, the midnight peace treaties, the bitter rivalries turned lasting loyalties. He promises we'll hear about drumstick-throwing riffs, wine-fueled compromise sessions, and a near breakup in Oaxaca when they nearly abandoned touring over contractual disputes. These are the secrets the Shades have kept under lock and key. And tonight, Billy is breaking the silence. Billy pauses on the edge of the stage, shades in hand, and leans forward. "There's more to our story than the hits," he begins. At the center of his revelations is the band's longtime manager, Bill Ham, a cowboy hat-clad impresario who steered ZZ Top from scrappy bar band to global phenomenon. Billy admits now that Ham's grip on publishing rights created silent resentments. "We signed contracts in our 20s without a clue," Gibbons confesses. Bill was a genius at promotion, but those agreements funneled the money uphill. Dusty and Frank got their paychecks. I got mine too, but we never saw the full mountain we'd helped build. In private, the band bristled over unequal royalties, but they swallowed their pride, trusting Ham's vision rather than challenge the man who brought them fame. Billy reveals the moment the tension breached the surface, the recording of Afterburner in 1985. Frustrated by Ham's insistence on a polished, synthesizer-driven sound, Dusty stormed out of the studio. He unplugged his bass and walked off, Billy recalls, voice low. "I chased after him, told him, 'We're at the crossroads where we become legends or we fade away.' He turned, tears in his eyes, and said, 'I'm not cut out for robot rock.'" That confrontation forced Ham to relent on some of the electronic layers, giving the rhythm section more breathing room. The resulting mix struck a balance between future-forward production and the band's muddy Texas roots, a compromise born of friction rather than harmony. Beyond financial disputes, personal rivalries simmered. Frank Beard, the only member without a beard joke in his name, often felt overlooked during photo shoots and press junkets. Frank's drumming was the pulse of the band, Billy emphasizes, but in our videos, you saw two guitars and Dusty's bass stomp. Frank looked like the ghost at every family portrait. Behind closed doors, Beard confronted Gibbons about the lack of recognition, threatening to quit just before a European tour. Billy pulled him aside one night over barbecue and beer in a Hamburg parking lot and said, "Brother, your groove is the engine. Without you, we're a Cadillac with no wheels." That moment of truth not only sealed their bond, but became the spark that drove Beard's inventive drum patterns on "Gimme All Your Lovin'." Gibbons also unearths the tale of their near miss with a Hollywood major. In the early 90s, after their MTV renaissance, a top studio exec offered to finance a ZZ Top biopic, complete with A-list actors and a $20 million budget. Bill Ham nearly sold the rights on the spot, Billy admits, and I was torn. I thought it could bring our story to a wider audience, but Dusty and Frank feared we'd be caricatures, our voices lost under some scriptwriter's pen. They ultimately vetoed the deal, a decision Gibbons now calls both painful and wise. "We saved our truth from being a studio fantasy," he says, nodding through the hush of the crowd. Then there was the unreleased album in 1971, recorded under the working title World Change, which Gibbons describes as the rawest collection of our blues experiments. Rough mixes of slide, heavy jams, and gospel-tinged ballads sat on tape in Allen's home studios for decades. "We shelved it because Bill Ham thought it would confuse listeners expecting the sound of Tres Hombres," Billy explains. But he's finally giving fans a glimpse. Later this year, Gibbons plans to issue those tracks as raw tracks from the attic, a long-promised archival release. "It's the DNA of ZZ Top," he says. "The seeds of everything that would come, before we learned how to polish our chrome." As the audience leans in, Billy shares a more vulnerable confession, the emotional toll these power struggles took on his personal life. "I was married twice, and every tour meant 8 months away," he says quietly. The late lament of his second wife, Linda, echoes in his words. She said, "Billy, I fell in love with your music, not the man on the bus." Gibbons chokes back a grin and a tear. "That heartbreak taught me that the band was family, but it never replaced the family I left behind." He closes section 2 with a look back at the aftermath. "We emerged from those battles stronger, committed to each other in ways only blood brothers can understand." Dusty and Frank weren't just bandmates. They were my anchors when management storms threatened to sink us. And now, at 75, I owe them every riff, every solo, the entire journey. The crowd rises, applause rolling like thunder. In lifting the velvet curtain on Money Wars, Near, Family Feuds, and Lost Recordings, Billy Gibbons shows that ZZ Top's legend was forged in the heat of conflict, and that behind every glucose-coated riff lies a story of struggle, loyalty, and finally, peace. Billy leans back, letting the applause fade into memory before diving into the next confession. Touring in a Cadillac, he begins, was glamorized in our videos, but the reality was a rattling, godforsaken coach that felt like a coffin on wheels. At the peak of their 80s fame, the band traveled coast to coast on a bus so cramped it left them bruised and sleep-deprived. Dusty slept in the aisle, Frank curled into his drum throne, and Billy, ever the night owl, would stare out the tinted windows at sunrise reflections, wondering if this was worth the toll on mind and body. We thought rock and roll meant endless motion, he admits. We never factored how motion sickness and broken routines would break us instead. Nights off stage proved equally bleak. Backstage lounges offered trays of champagne and trays of painkillers, and Billy watched bandmates pop pills for headaches born of blaring amps. I chased bliss in bottle caps, he confesses, voice rough as gravel. I drank enough right to sink a ship. He recalls one near tragedy in Minneapolis when he collapsed after a 3-night bender. My heart skipped beats. My chest felt like it was closing in, he says. Doctors warned him it was exhaustion and alcohol, a combination that could kill. That wake-up call triggered his first real intervention. Dusty and Frank staged an intervention in his hotel suite. They left him with 2 choices, sober up or go home alone. They saved my life, he says softly, but I felt ashamed that my brothers had to beg me to live. In the raw light of sobriety, Billy discovered cracks in the band's dynamic beyond substance misuse. He realized how fame had distorted their view of success. Sold-out arenas felt empty without genuine camaraderie. We stopped playing for ourselves, he reflects. We played for the echo of our own echoes. That insight led to a sliver of compromise. During the 1990 tour, they parked the bus for a week in Santa Fe, New Mexico. With no stage lights or loudspeakers, the trio sat around a crackling fire pit, guitars in lap, sharing stories instead of songs. It was there, Billy says, that they remembered why they formed the band, to play blues and connect souls, not just fill coffers. But old patterns die hard. When the 2000s rolled in, ZZ Top faced a new challenge, the internet. Fake videos of their performance leaked online, some spliced with actors' voices for crude prank calls. Billy spent nights combing through forums, fuming at trolls mocking their Texas pride. These jokers thought they could hijack our image like a cheap tack, he growls. He hired a small team of online sleuths to remove bootlegs and send cease and desist letters. It was a battle too, another reminder that protecting art had become as consuming as creating it. Amid online warfare, personal lives unraveled further. Billy's 3rd marriage faltered under the pressure of digital exposure and constant touring. She craved a partner, not a phantom who buskied in 5-second clips on YouTube, he says. The divorce weighed on him more than any business dispute. You can lose millions of record sales, he muses, but losing someone who believed in you hurts deeper than any broken string. Through these trials, Frank and Dusty remained his anchor. Billy tells of the time Frank flew into suburban Dallas on a private jet just to surprise him at home, saying, "We can't let this band die over some tweets." Dusty, always the steady heartbeat, called nightly to check on Billy's sobriety. Those calls saved me more times than I can count, he acknowledges. The trio's bond, forged in conflict and calamity, became both shield and sword, protecting them from external vultures while reminding them of why they endured. Then there were the songs that never saw the light. Half-written riffs jotted on cocktail napkins in smoky dressing rooms. Lyrics about redemption and regret left to gather dust in a Nashville vault. Billy promises that someday raw tracks from the Attic Volume 2 will unearth these hidden gems, songs of loneliness after the final encore and of hope found in the spaces between spotlight and silence. He hints at a ballad called After the Fire, written in tribute to the intervention that saved him, and Miles to Go, inspired by the endless hours behind a tour bus wheel. As he surveys the rapt audience, Billy raises his guitar pick high. Every riff we played carried the weight of these secrets, he says. And now you know the strings behind the shine. With that, he straps on his favorite Gibson, launching into a slide-soaked instrumental that ripples through the hall like a confession in 6/8 time, raw, honest, and unfiltered. The crowd sways, not to a polished hit, but to the cadence of a lifetime lived in sun-baked bars, neon-titled stages, and the quiet moments of brotherhood after the final chord as the final notes of that impromptu instrumental faded. Billy let out a low chuckle. That was the honest engine of our sound, he said, sliding off his Gibson and leaning into the mic stand. But now I'll tell you about the moment we almost sold our souls for a video. It was 1984, the dawn of MTV, when music videos became currency, and ZZ Top's manager Bill Ham saw opportunity. He envisioned three bearded Texans cruising in satin suits and leather pants, backed by leggy dancers and fishnets, to sell records to a generation glued to television screens. Dusty and Frank hesitated. They loved their blues roots image and worried wink-wink humor would cheapen their authenticity. Billy admits now he was torn, drawn by the promise of massive exposure, but haunted by the fear of becoming caricatures of themselves. The shoot 4 legs took place in a cavernous warehouse outside Dallas. Cameras rolled on endless crane shots and pyrotechnic flourishes. The dancers were professional entertainers flown in from LA, coached to strut and swivel around the band's stationary trio. Billy remembers watching through smoky haze as choreographers barked orders. Hip out more. Rock harder. Give him a tease. The riffs played in the background felt like an echo of a different song, a track detached from its origin. Gibbons tried to capture the band's spirit, sliding his fingers along the strings with more gusto than usual, hoping the camera would hide the dissonance between blues, soul, and glossy glam. In the control room, Dusty frowned at the monitors. Frank tapped his drumsticks nervously on a crate. Billy approached their corner and whispered, "This is going to sell 1 million copies, and we'll love it, or hate it, but we'll be heard." He'd grown comfortable with compromise when it meant reaching wider audiences. Yet watching their likeness paraded as cartoon versions of themselves stung. As the director called cut, Dusty confronted Billy backstage. "Are we selling out our heritage for neon lights?" That confrontation escalated, voices raised until Ham himself intervened, calming both men. He reminded them that rock and roll had always been theater, an artifice that sold dreams. But for Billy, that moment would later represent the thin line they walked between art and artifice. The video's release blew up their careers. Legs became a staple on MTV, pushing Eliminator to multi-platinum heights. The fishnet-gloved dancers became pop culture icons. The beards and Cadillacs became branding gold. Yet for Dusty, every cheer from the crowd felt tinged with irony. Fans clapped for synchronized moves, not raw bass grooves. Frank felt like a sideman in his own band, reduced to pixelated shadows and quick edits. Billy watched it all and wondered whether the trade-off had been worth the price. He could see why the world adored the spectacle. He could feel their pulses raised by the glossy sheen. But deep down, part of him mourned the simplicity of smoky clubs and unfiltered jams. That tension simmered even as the band toured arenas to packed houses of screaming teenagers, many seeing the group for the first time on MTV. Between shows, Dusty insisted on bus conversations about roots, urging the group to slip back into acoustic rehearsals for a more intimate vibe. Frank joined him, tapping out grooves on the tabletop with a shared hunger for a return to blues basics. Billy, riding high on renewed fame, sometimes resisted, tired of smaller showcases. Yet he admits now that those bus stop debates saved them from drifting too far into showbiz fantasy. They reminded him and the guys why they'd formed the trio in the first place. In later years, Billy wrestled with how to honor both chapters of their legacy. He finally decided, embrace the craziness of Eliminator-era glam while preserving the original blues DNA. He launched limited edition raw and wild sets, live EPs recorded in small venues, released alongside deluxe video anthologies. That dual approach let fans experience both sides of ZZ Top without choosing one over the other. "We refused to let the video kill the music," Billy says, voice warm with pride. "We danced with the devil of MTV, then we came back home to the Church of the Blues." Contrast framed every choice. On one side stood the intoxicating neon lights of mass appeal. On the other, the dim lamplight of Mississippi Delta tradition. Billy held fast to both realms, even when it meant juggling clashing expectations and gnawing doubts. At 75, he acknowledges that tension as the secret ingredient of ZZ Top's longevity. Fans didn't just ride along in Cadillacs. They felt the friction between spectacle and substance driving every riff and harmony. Now, as he leans into the mic for Q&A, he invites questions about that balancing act, about how a band can thrive in both smoky backrooms and glossy TV studios without losing its soul. He knows the answer lies in conflict, in the very debates that once fueled late-night renegotiations of identity. And with each question, he grins behind his shades, ready to spin those stories into the melody of a band that refused to be defined by a single E or as the 21st century unfolded. ZZ Top faced a new, unavoidable rival, time itself. By the early 2000s, Billy, Dusty, and Frank had logged more miles than any highway could measure. Their faces had grown weathered like well-worn saddles. At age 60, Gibbons felt the strain of stiff joints and late-night adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. Frank's wrists ached from decades of cymbal crashes. Dusty began to stumble over bass lines he once played blindfolded. Behind the scenes, the trio argued fiercely about whether to slow their breakneck touring pace or carve out more room for rest and creative renewal. Those debates, Billy now admits, nearly splintered them more than any record label dispute ever could. In 2019, the band set out on what was billed as the final grand tour, a celebration of 50 vibrant years on stage. Thousands of fans clamored for tickets as Sharp Dressed Man and Gimme All Your Lovin' fueled arenas once more. But midway through the European leg, Dusty fell ill. It began with dizzy spells backstage, then tremors in his fingers during soundcheck. Gibbons recalls the chilly Paris night when Frank whispered wordlessly, "He's not okay." In that moment, Billy's heart hammered harder than any amp. He bristled at the thought of ending the run early, but Dusty's faltering performance on La Grange silenced any hope of pushing on. They canceled the next 3 shows. Behind closed tour bus doors, tempers flared. Dusty, proud to a fault, refused to rest. Frank grew frantic, desperate to protect his friend. Billy, torn between loyalty and commercial pressure, flew home for emergency care and face-to-face talks with Dusty's family. They staged an intervention in his childhood home outside Dallas, urging him to step off stage indefinitely. Dusty's response was characteristically wry. "You boys hired me to play bass, not hire a nurse." Still, he agreed to treatment. And, in July 2021, ZZ Top lost more than a bandmate when Dusty Hill passed away at age 72. The shockwave hit Gibbons like a freight train. He retreated to a secluded hilltop retreat, guitar in hand, but words elusive. For weeks he stared at Dusty's polished double-neck bass, now silent in the corner of the studio. When he returned to work, Billy fell into an unrelenting creative gloom. Jesting riffs dried up. Songwriting felt meaningless without his longtime collaborator. Fans feared the worst. Would ZZ Top survive this loss? Then, in the quiet aftermath, Billy found a spark in Dusty's final voicemail. A raspy thank you for years of friendship, and a challenge to keep the music alive. That message became the cornerstone of Gibbons's decision to carry on. He invited Dusty's son, Bowen, to step in on bass, honoring his father's legacy while breathing fresh life into the trio's chemistry. Critics balked at the idea of a replacement, but Bowen's soulful thump and uncanny groove silenced doubt. Together, Billy, Frank, and Bowen launched Echoes of the Blues, a tour tribute that sold out theaters, celebrating Dusty's life rather than mourning it. In the studio, Billy dug into Dusty's lost demos, bass riffs scrawled on napkins, unfinished melodies Dusty had whispered into his phone. Gibbons wove those fragments into a somber but hopeful album titled Dusty's Echo, featuring Frank's final drum takes alongside Bowen's respectful bass lines and Billy's slide guitar soaring above. Fans hailed it as the band's most human record, gritty with grief, yet ablaze with the resilience that had defined ZZ Top from day one. Contrast framing. The band that once fought over sequencers and synthesizers now grappled with absence and grief. The polished stage lights gave way to flickering candles in small listening rooms where fans pressed play on Memories of God and Groove, Dusty's last unguarded ballad. Music critics called it a masterclass in elegy, a testament to how struggle can yield honest art. As he reflects today, Billy says that Dusty's passing reshaped every decision he makes, from set lists that include tender tributes to front porch songwriting sessions open to the public. He's curated a traveling museum of ZZ Top memorabilia, Dusty's favorite harmonicas, Frank's beat-scarred snares, Billy's battered Les Pauls, so that wherever the band plays, fans can witness the artifacts of 50-plus years of brotherhood in boots and beards. Now, at 75, Gibbons stands on stage again, Cadillacs and guitars gleaming, but eyes revealing the scars of loss and renewal. He's proven that conflict, be it over production choices, MTV makeovers, or the heartache of losing a brother, became the crucible for creativity. ZZ Top's story lives on not as a straight line of hits, but as a winding Texas tale of grit, devotion, and the decision to press on when every bridge seems burned in the twilight of a 75-year journey. Billy Gibbons reflects on how every conflict, every late-night argument, and every near-miss fueled the riff-driven legend of ZZ Top. He's learned that creative tension isn't a curse, but the spark that ignites innovation. At 75, he's not slowing down. He's sharpening his focus on legacy. That means honoring the past while charting new courses for the band. He helped forge from honky-tonk roots into global icons. First on Billy's agenda is a carefully curated archival series, Raw Tracks from the Attic Volumes 3 and 4. These upcoming releases will unearth more of those early blues experiments and never-heard live cuts from the 80s and 90s, with liner notes that recount the behind-the-scenes battles that shaped each performance. Gibbons personally oversaw restoration, ensuring every crackle and hiss retains its authenticity. He wants fans to hear Dusty Hill's crystalline bass in its original form, and Frank Beard's propulsive drum feels unvarnished by modern editing. In Billy's view, imperfections are part of the story. Next comes a feature-length documentary titled Beard, Bass and Badlands, the ZZ Top Chronicles. Produced in partnership with Dusty Hill's estate and directed by a renowned music filmmaker, it will weave concert footage, private interviews, and never-before-seen rehearsal tapes into a narrative tapestry. Billy has insisted on unfiltered honesty, approving candid discussions of money disputes, personal struggles, and the band's near-split moments. If we sanitize our history, we rob future generations of the real lessons, he says. The doc will premiere at film festivals next year before airing as a multi-part special on streaming platforms. Beyond releases and retrospectives, Billy has embraced mentorship. He's launched the Gibbons Institute for Blues Foundation, a scholarship program supporting young guitarists who study the original Delta masters while embracing modern innovation. He hosts masterclasses, sometimes live on social media, teaching slide technique, stagecraft, and the art of channeling conflict into creativity. To him, every argument over tone or tempo was an apprenticeship in musical alchemy. Now he wants to pass those lessons along. Billy's also committed to preserving the physical artifacts of their odyssey. He has donated Dusty's final double-neck bass, Frank's signature drumsticks, and his own well-worn Les Paul to a new museum annex at the Bob Bullock Texas State History Museum in Austin. This interactive exhibit, Beards, Boots, and Blues, will let visitors handle replica instruments, mix isolated tracks on a digital console, and even record their own versions of ZZ Top classics. Billy envisions school groups, aspiring musicians, and fans gleaning context on how behind-the-scenes friction shaped each riff they love. On tour, ZZ Top has embraced a hybrid format. Instead of relentless arena runs, they balance headline shows with intimate B.B. King nights, club-style performances where Billy, Bowen Hill, and Frank Beard share stories between songs. These stripped-down gigs harken back to those Santa Fe fire pit sessions, spaces where vulnerability and raw chemistry reign. Fans appreciate seeing the band in its purest form, without pyrotechnics or video screens, reminding all that at its heart, ZZ Top is three musicians communicating soul to soul. Personal life remains equally important. Billy spends off-season months at his rural Texas retreat, tending his garden, painting abstract landscapes, and writing memoir chapters that chronicle not only music industry battles, but also heartbreaks, redemption, and the enduring power of brotherhood. His third wife, whom he credits for guiding him through sobriety and grief, sits by his side as he crafts each chapter. He aims to publish the memoir under the title Shade of the Beard, acknowledging that behind every stage persona was a man seeking shade, rest, reflection, and renewal. In interviews, Billy emphasizes one core truth. Conflict is a sign of investing in something meaningful. Without Dusty's revolts, Frank's demands, or Bilham's management battles, ZZ Top would have been a bland echo of countless other bands. Instead, they emerged as a tapestry woven from clashes over contracts, creative direction, and the very soul of their sound. "We didn't just play music together," he says, "we fought for it. Every riff, every groove, every neon flourish." As the final act of his life's performance, Billy invites fans to embrace imperfection. He encourages young artists to argue over disagreement, to turn friction into fuel, and to understand that the most enduring art often arises from the pressure of creative conflict. He plans one last global tour, Beards Against the World, that revisits every phase of ZZ Top's evolution, from raw Texas blues to MTV spectacles to elegiac tributes after Dusty's passing. In each city, they'll blend electrified anthems with stripped-down confessions, weaving the full arc of their saga into one continuous, unbroken set. When that tour concludes, Billy imagines stepping off stage for the final time, sliding his shades over tired eyes, and knowing he's honored every chapter. Friends made, battles fought, losses endured, and hymns of celebration played. His last words on record will ring true. The velvet curtain may fall, but the echoes of those conflicts, those spark moments, will resound in every guitar string, in every musician's heart, for generations to come. And with that, the story of ZZ Top, laid bare in riffs and revelations, will stand as a testament to the power of struggle, solidarity, and the timeless allure of three beards roaring across the vast Texas night.